All right, hello everyone. My name is Haley Melendez, and this is my project, Academic Performance and Redefining Space, with my faculty advisor, Dr. Ditta. All right, so what happened? COVID-19 happened. During the pandemic, students were forced to become completely virtual. This meant that they lost their stable environment for academic work, for learning, for teaching, etc. So we saw, or sorry, not me, but this research coming out is seeing that students had poor cognitive engagement, decreased motivation, increased negative emotions across American students when compared to other countries, such as Turkey and Peru, and as well as increased anxiety and stress about education. Another study done on comparing countries across students. So students, this is leading to the question of, are students suffering from this loss of a stable learning environment? And this led me to question if they'd be able to benefit from being able to distinguish their home from school. So this led me to create something that I've called space blocking. Space blocking is essentially a studying technique that students can use no matter what study techniques or tools they already have in place, and it's supposed to be used at home. And essentially you dedicate a singular space in your home environment to only academic related tasks, and you avoid other distractions such as like phone use or other leisure activities. So ideally this should be feasible because things like context-dependent memory, studies done by Godin and Badley, 1975, showed that learning and recall in the same environment has greater recall in that same environment, as well as mental representations leading to reinstatement effects done by Smith 2014 and 1979 showed that mental reinstatement, essentially you can take the concept of a place, reapply it in a new space, and have the same recall as compared to the physical environment. As well as habit formation, we can see that attitude can affect behavior, and consistent repetition can lead to habit formation. So if a student is ideally in a space, a particular space in the home, they can be doing things like studying in that space. Over time, it'd be easier to initiate studying when they just sit down at the desk or a similar space. So in order to test this out, essentially, I use SONA to recruit introductory to psychology students from summer session B 21, fall 21, and winter 22. Separated them randomly via Qualtrics to two groups, space blocking or the control group. Space blocking was given instructions on how to use space blocking, not necessarily the perceived effects of it. And the control group was not asked to change anything about their studying habits already in place. And what they were sent out 4 surveys throughout each of the quarters, respectively, and we could see that by the end of it, collectively, space blocking had 19, and the control group had 28 left after looking through viable data. And we looked at the results based on survey 4 data. This asked questions about the perception of space blocking itself, and students in the space blocking group significantly agreed that focus in class and while studying, they were able to better focus in class and while studying. And then when asked the question if space blocking is useful for future incorporation, students in space blocking group agreed that it would be compared to the control group who was just asked about being a participant in the study. Overall, space blocking has the potential to be a useful tool for future virtual classes. And this study did have some limitations in this design. One, the sample size was based on introductory to psych students. We did have some technical difficulties as well as a number of dropouts. And then we also didn't ask students if what specific spaces they were using. We only focus on perceptions of space blocking. So we can't necessarily define if, like, for example, asking about space blocking was effective in itself, or if students who had already been using something similar, if that was already working for them and they were just now aware that it was working. So overall, I'd like to take the time to give a special thank you to Dr. Ditta for being my faculty mentor in this capstone project. Also to James Kim, University Honors Director, the UCR Community in general, the Honors Program, as well as to the Introductory to Psych students for their participation in this project. Here are my references. Oh, we got formatted long, but all right. All right, thank you everyone. Any questions, please feel free to ask, and here's my email if you have any more questions after this.
I was just curious to know, so the students who were in the space blocking group, when you sent out the surveys for them, was there any questions asking if they were staying in the same seat while in class or if they were moving around in class as well? And if that affected their, I guess, data or
That was one of the questions we didn't ask. So we didn't ask specifically about like, where are you studying? Are you moving around and all that? The questions, for example, from surveys 2 and 3 were more like checkpoints. So we did ask questions that have you been using it? And if you haven't, why not? And for future research, we would definitely like to look at that. Like, does it actually matter if you're moving around? Does it actually matter if you stay at one desk or if you don't have a desk space and you're somewhere else? So that'd definitely be interesting for future research.
Is there any reason that you chose to use Survey 4 data?
Yes, so Survey 4 was more like the culmination of the entire quarter, and as well as that's where we were able to run independent T-sample tests across the two groups to see if there was anything significant about the data that we had collected at that point.
Hi, so since we're kind of going back in person, so I know you do this online, but do you think any of this data would be useful for students who are now transitioning to in-person learning?
No, I do think so. So a big thing to consider is that virtual learning isn't gone. Like it's not disappearing. It's not a new concept either. It just happened to explode over the pandemic. So virtual learning is essentially here to stay. And we can't forget the students who are going to continue to use virtual learning. So I agree that this tool should still stick around, or at least research into perception of academic environments so that we can better the experience for students no matter the mode of learning they're in currently.
Yeah, I was just wondering what were the requirements when you were picking participants? Was it like students who were like A grades already, or was it like students in more like ranges? And if like any of their grades like had gotten better after using space blocking, and if you like compared that with the control?
That is actually another data group that we didn't look at. So we didn't look at specific like grades or anything. One, it's a little bit hard to do that for students to see if there's actually a significant difference between those who use it or not. Once again, in the future, it would be nice to see if we could do a comparison. The only limitations were the basic, they just needed to speak English and and I think that was it, just be introductory to psych.
Now, do you have any predictions from the I feel like they're so used to space blocking that
Okay, so in that regards, the hope behind space blocking is that if you're like, for example, at home or learning virtually at home, you've used a space at home that is for academic purposes. That doesn't necessarily mean it has to go away either or negatively affect you, because you can still come home after school and do homework in that space, or you can use it to do private research or private studying. And then in terms of like transitioning back to school, ideally, space blocking works as a medium between the two, because you could, the idea here is that you go to school and you already have this like, I'm here to learn, I'm here to do academic things. But you know, when you go home, it's like, I'm here to rest, I'm here to do what I want to do, right? So the idea is how can we bridge the gap? And then space blocking ideally bridges that specific gap. Thank you. I like that question.
You said that you only looked at introductory psych students?
Mm-hmm. I looked at it mostly because it was the easiest group to collect data on, because it was that's the easiest to look at, and also at that time, it kind of worked out that they were still one of the biggest like virtual classes still available, because by the time I was doing research, we were starting that transition to be more in person. I think at this point now, introductory to psych is probably mostly in person, right? Or it's coming to that point.
in the fall it'll be back though.
Okay, so it's still like it's starting to transition out of, at least, or like some of those students are now in person and online. So it was probably a good group to do it on, but in the future I'd like to expand that sample, because the studying can look different, for example, from a psych student to a science student to a math student to a theater student, right? It can look different. So that'd be fun for future research as well.
Do you think space blocking looks different for students that they may not have that space in their home because they have like multiple family members or like multiple roommates?
Yes, I completely agree. I think that was probably my biggest concern when thinking about space blocking, because I understand that it's more of a point of privilege if you have a space, right? So essentially, I don't have it in these slides, but I have an instruction list that I gave out to my space blocking group. If you don't, and essentially said like, if you don't have those desks, consider doing things like if you have a dining room table, separating it between a seat for eating, a seat for doing schoolwork. If you have too much commotion on, or you share a space like a room, a bedroom with multiple people, consider cutting off time between, example, 8 a.m., 12 p.m., your academic only mindset in a desk or in that space, whatever, for that period of time. And that's one of the benefits, I'd say, of space blocking, is it's supposed to be adaptable for individuals to use however they need it to work for them.